Again, you're being an activist. I am
That's not appropriate, sir.
Who are you with? What's your name?
That's not an appropriate question for you to ask.
You're going to ask how many questions? You get 3?
You're a stupid son of a bitch.
Welcome to another episode of Friendly Fire, a show dedicated to all things libertarian. That includes candidates for public office, party office, bill reviews, from a libertarian perspective, of course, and even matters regarding the party itself. Unlike other shows, Friendly Fire exists to be critical and tough, but fair and honest. Feel like I'm starting to sound like Fox News, but I'm not. Former Florida governor and lieutenant governor candidates Hector, Roos, and Tub Rorabaugh join me today to discuss the presidential preference primary here in Florida. The Libertarian Party of Florida will be voting this June 18th on whether to petition the state for inclusion in this process. The issue has caused consternation with many members. Here to discuss, please welcome Hector, Roos, and Tub Rorabaugh. Gentlemen, how are you?
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. So let's get this started. We're talking about the presidential preference primary, and I believe this was initiated by you, Hector, correct?
Yeah, it is my motion. Yes.
Okay. So let's start at the beginning. I want to make this simple, right? Like I've tried to read about it and I don't quite understand a few things. I think I kind of get the general layout, and I know that some people are pretty angry. So let's kind of make this as simple as possible. And let's start. What is the presidential preference primary?
Sure. I'm assuming that's questions for me.
Yes.
The presidential preference primary, like all state-run primaries, are subsidized ways for political parties to market their brand and candidates, and in some cases, like in Florida, used to pressure voters to choose to register to vote with those parties that are the legacy parties in order to participate. Generally speaking, this strategy has worked toward creating a highly polarized us versus them society today. And remember that as we discuss this topic. But basically, the presidential preference primary poll, down to nuts and bolts, is a non-binding poll. It will be held on March 19th for voters to express their preference for the presidential candidate they would like to see representing their party on the general election ballot in November. And only, this is a very important point, only the political parties themselves can decide who gets on this ballot. The last thing I'll say about this is that typically Florida runs this poll under a closed primary configuration. So voters would be required to declare their party affiliation or register as a member of that political party. I say typically because the primary seems to only be a custom under Florida law. There's no explicit prohibition under section 103.101 of Florida statute that would prohibit people who are not registered with that party to choose that party's ballot or the party to allow such voters to vote. So It is by position we can go into that, but I hope that explains it. I'll talk about position in a moment.
Okay. So it's one giant poll, right? Okay. So now let's back up a little bit, and instead of driving right at the LPF, let's talk about the Republican and the Democrat parties. What is their gain from it currently?
Well, they get as I said at the beginning, they get a huge marketing boost of their own candidates, and that is at no cost. It's cost to taxpayers. It's a sunk cost that taxpayers pay out of their tax revenue, and of course, it continues to put pressure on voters. If you want to have your candidate of choice, you must register to as part of this party to weigh in your opinion or preference. So they get the double whammy of, hey, we are the big boys, and you have to play by our rules, and we will use state power to remind you of that fact constantly until this vote happens.
Okay, so in this particular case, what we're saying is the voters are not the ones that are running the show in a sense, because they're being told, what I'm hearing from you is that they're being told by the state, you play this game, and then the political parties are kind of running that game in a sense. Am I hearing this correctly?
Right. And ultimately it's only a poll. It's not even binding.
Okay. And so, but I guess my question then becomes, why would the Libertarian Party want to engage in this kind of a process where we are playing along. First of all, we'd be playing along with an already established game, right? So we would be playing along with the game that the Republican and Democrat parties are controlling, right? They're running the game. So we're not going to come in and change the game per se any more than, like, say, we change the game when it comes to presidential debates, right? Like, they're running the show. We're not running the show. We're just kind of tagging along where we can, if we can. So why would we want to get involved in that?
So first of all, we already are involved. We are a duly recognized political party, that is the Libertarian Party of Florida, in the state. That means we have all the same rights and privileges as any other political party in the state, regardless of their size. And it is my position that if libertarians choose to call this kind of primary, they should also open it up. They should not follow the same rules as Democrats or Republicans and play their game. We should use the law to our advantage, be disruptive, and call for a presidential preference primary that involves people outside of our own party. In this case, invite the 4 million independent voters that are out there to also participate, with the opportunity that just tell it, we won't make you do this. We won't coerce you as the other parties would, and let us know if you were interested in being involved in this party, and tell us by your preference of the candidate that of our internal candidates for the nomination for presidency.
So tell me how this disrupts the two-party. Like, imagine for a moment that the LPF votes on this, they vote in favor of it. Then and I believe what we do is we have to petition the state in order to, and then the state decides whether or not we get to participate, correct?
We will send them a letter. That's the formal, that's what the political parties have to do. They send a letter requesting under state law, it's mandatory for the two legacy parties. Under the language that I read in the statute, it says basically optional for what they call minor parties.
Right. Okay. So we would basically have to submit and request from them to participate. So let's just assume for a moment that all this plays out just like that. How do you envision this disruption happening? Okay. So where's the disruption? And because that would effectively be the value add, at least one of them for the Libertarian Party, is that we're disrupting an already existing system. So where does that happen? How does that happen?
The system right now is it's a cacophony of noise that just says Democrat or says Republican, and you have no choice otherwise. Actually, having to oblige people to start talking about a Libertarian presidential preference primary is disruptive in and of itself. Offering an opportunity for people to vote when they didn't have an opportunity to vote is disruptive in and of itself, because either they had to change their voter registration or they would stay out of it completely. And if given the opportunity, what would people do, right? So first of all, and obviously it's speculative, but so is saying that libertarians doing what we're doing now is going to win somehow in another 50 years.
Okay. All right. So have you considered, now, one of the things that I like when I'm thinking strategy, right? I like to think of, okay, I do this. What's my value add? How will this look? Then we have to start thinking, okay, what can go wrong? So what can go wrong in this? Again, the LPF passes the motion, then they submit to the state agrees. We start to try to disrupt. Obviously, the Republicans and the Republican parties, the two parties, Republicans and Democrats, are not going to just, like, if it's really disrupting them, they're not going to just sit, keep take it sitting down. So what is their response going to be? How might this backfire?
Well, in regards to the response of the two legacy parties, I haven't even thought about that, because their major way of handling libertarians is just to ignore them. It's very rare to sit here, especially in Florida, to sit here and watch them attack libertarians. It almost never happens, unlike in other states where there's a more of an influence in the daily politics. But let's go for downsides. This is a conversation regarding how we approach Florida. How we approach our goals in Florida. So I put this out there, and the first response was, "Oh, this idea is new," and this is, even though it's not new in other states, it is new for Florida to even start thinking about this way. So some people's heads just absolutely exploded. They start thinking, panicking. Oh, is this calling for an open primary? No. Is this calling for a closed primary? No. This is calling for our choice in on how we want this preference primary to happen. Now, this proposal weighs risks and rewards, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, at this point is, there are people who internally who say, well, they just reject everything that's kind of new, and or they're not comfortable with because it is new and they don't see the foresight of it. And there is that and resistance for resistance sake. And some people, like we always see, will say, well, if I don't do that, I'm picking up my toys and leaving. So that's one particular downside is internal.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, since it's unknown and speculative, as well as both the risk and rewards, but in analyzing what the risks are, for example, we choose as a part, what kind of a dangerous candidate could get on the ballot. Well, we know that the process allows for only the political party to decide who gets on the ballot. So we minimize it by actually making sure that the only quality candidates make it on the ballot. And then there's this other question from the political campaigns themselves. Why are you making us campaign for this preference primary, which is a legitimate concern of theirs because they have limited resources like the state parties. And I would minimize the risk and expense to them by saying the state party should engage in a statewide marketing effort to boost all the profiles of all the candidates and because we want people to participate. So technically, ultimately the reason why they're so concerned is because technically someone could come in with a lot of money and buy the election just by dumping a lot of marketing dollars onto this and advocating for people to come out and vote more on top of what we at a state party would do. But why would anybody want to do that in a non-binding primary that would happen weeks after our own state convention electing our national delegates? So there are ways to even improve on that, so that risk is mitigated, such as trying to publish election results based on candidates that were registered and those who aren't, and then you can measure what the actual crossover vote, because ultimately we want to measure how much appeal our candidates have outside of the Libertarian Party. How about that?
Okay, so let me ask you a couple questions here. Oh, go ahead, Tub.
Hang on. Listen, I've sat here for 13 minutes and haven't said anything. You got to start with that's pretty impressive.
That is impressive.
So now let me kind of chime in. Give me a couple seconds here, a couple minutes here, maybe to rant that way. And so here's the thing. I've kind of sat in the middle of this one. All right. I had a pretty lengthy conversation the other day with Hector. I had a conversation with somebody else the other day. And in that, I think that is depending on who I was talking to, you would think I was on the other side of things. Like when I talked to Hector, I think he felt like, dude, why are you not on side with me? When I talked to the other ones, I sit in the middle because there's some issues that come out of this overall. Now, first, Hector, you mentioned the idea of the primary things is to force people into signing into those parties, to registering for those parties. And then you go and quote how there's 4 million NPAs. So it's not doing that. Okay, let's be very clear. The primaries are not forcing anybody to any parties because they're still opting out. Okay, so to say that we force them in that way, I don't think that necessarily holds true. Also, I've never come across anybody who is an NPA who is complaining because they don't get to vote in primaries. I haven't voted in primaries for over 17 years now, and I just accept that as that's where I'm at. And I don't even care because I don't care about those two parties anyway. So why do I care about who they're choosing or not choosing at that point? Now, here's the thing. You mentioned that it's non-binding, which runs into an issue because then people go, what's the point? Like, why bother if it ultimately is just this idea that we can run off and do something? Now, this is how I kind of countered that, okay? So I said, let's say, okay, technically it's non-binding and we don't have to follow whoever the candidate becomes. But I use the example of Chase Oliver. Chase Oliver's been coming through Florida enough and he's kind of making his presence known here. And so imagine that when you went to the national convention, whoever that candidate is that won the primary of Florida, if nothing else, that's bragging rights and the ability to kind of sway some people. Like, hey, you know what? They can sway the delegates by saying, hey, I won Florida. So there is some benefit overall that comes out of it. Now, here's the thing. I think that when Hector and I talked about this before, there were only two issues that I really had about it. Okay, and especially about party side of things. One is I think the idea of opening it up is a horrible idea. All right, I think that it needs to stay closed to libertarians because I say that once you open up a primary, I think I actually mentioned it the other night, it's kind of like allowing your neighbor to come in and decide how you're going to run your house. And as libertarians, we always say we don't want anybody else deciding who gets to choose us. And here's the thing: once you allow NPAs, because I know that's what you said, you open it up to NPAs specifically. But historically, NPAs still tend to vote in the direction of the parties that they came from. So if you open that up to them, we're going to be diluted from the start because a number of those aren't libertarians. And so they can, whether they set it up and do the wrong thing or the right thing, is always an issue. Okay, like I understand that. So I look at it, I go, we have that. The other side was the only complaint that I really had was I think that for us as a party, we need to kind of hit the brakes a little bit and give us some time to get the importance of this. Like I'm not for or against. I see benefits on both sides. And so I think if we kind of pump the brakes a little bit, say, hey, listen, let's see about holding this off a little bit, the vote that you want to have coming up. If we can hold that off a little bit and give it a chance to kind of disseminate through the affiliates and across the state so that we can get some real input. Like the other night after our business meeting, we brought it up real quick because, and you know what the issue was of those of us who were sitting there, the biggest issue of all of us was we didn't know enough. Like we didn't have enough information to really kind of decide where we were at. So I think that if we take some time and we spread this out, we can get a better feeling for where the party is, because that's what this should be about. Now, lastly, I'm growing wearisome of the fact that libertarians are just going to be disruptors and how are we going to go stir things up? Here's an idea. Why don't we not care about what the Republicans and Democrats do? I don't care. If I wanted to care about what they were doing, I would go be a part of them. So why don't we stop being disruptors and just seeing how we can set them off and actually clean up our own house and focus on things that we have going on, that we can get ourselves squared away. Don't want to worry about how we're disrupting them. So how we disrupt them with this, I don't care a lick. How it makes us better, I think, has to become our point. So I went 13 minutes and I took 4 more right there. I'll be quiet now.
Okay. All right, Hector, how do you respond to all of that? And by the way, just one moment. I saw some comments there that Tub was a little bit difficult to hear. I tried to adjust your settings. So when he speaks again, please, those in the audience, just kind of let me know. Hector.
Just really quick to respond to the question in the comments. We cannot. Our candidates are selected at the national convention. That will be in Memorial Day weekend, which is in May 24th to 26th, and so that we have it there. That's why this is non-binding, and we can't bind our delegates either to vote for the winner of the contest anyway under our party rules. Now, to respond to Tub, and I love Tub, and I have a lot of respect for him and everybody in Jacksonville. When I say this, it's not a question of whether we want our neighbors to be invited uninvited politely to our house or not. Our house is on fire. Our house is on fire. This is an issue. This is an issue of importance, of prioritization. Like at this point, our country is in a state of the political state that it's in is, hey, we're going to have ex-presidents arrested. People want to indict the sitting president. There's criminality all over the place. People would have described that we are living right now in a color revolution in this country, and we're arguing about what not to do. No, I'm here to argue what to do, and that is why I'm here. And I'll have the other responses if I may continue.
Absolutely.
All right. So a non-binding, why is it important? Well, millions of other voters already participate in the other primaries, and they find it interesting to be able to line up behind and show the support they have for their own candidates. Oh my God. It's a question of, can we provide this opportunity for our own internal candidates to build up the support that they need to succeed in November 2? I think it's a very useful tool. Next, MPA voters don't demand the participation in primaries. I mean, it may be in your experience. In mine, I've come across many that actually do, and we have almost 30% of the vote in Florida is just MPA voters. Why? For a good reason, right? And the reason why they haven't chosen to switch over to the Libertarian Party is because they actually don't know that much about us. Period. So
that doesn't give them motivation to come in. Then, if they can stay where they are and still get to play in our game. So basically, what I'm saying is, you don't get to come in. So many times people, because we're not telling them they can't vote primaries. You can vote any primary you want. Just join that party and vote all you want to vote. So what I'm saying, though, is that so many times we see inside the church, people want to not be a part of the group, but be a part of the group. They want the benefits without having to be in the group. And what you're saying is we want to get people to register as libertarians. So my thing is, if you don't force them to come into the party in order to vote in the primary, you've given them no more motivation to come in. Now, once again, remember, I'm not necessarily against this. I think it should be closed. That's all.
Right. Bar another other ways that have the kind of scale and people involved that could possibly have. This is an incredible tool that libertarians in Florida should grasp onto. To put it in perspective, there's 46,000 registered libertarians in the state of Florida. We're talking about, even at the worst interest level of NPA voters at 1%, that likely are libertarian, self-identified libertarians. By the way, I can get into that in a moment. 1% of 4 million is 40,000. So, to identify a group of libertarians under our current system and scale, it would take years to identify that many people. So is it disruptive when we are being able to succeed in those kind of numbers? I believe it's disruptive. I see there's value in advocating for this. And this isn't a crazy idea. There are many other states that hold primaries there, and even invite MPA voters to do so as well. So this isn't just, I made this up from thin air. This was originally requested and pointed out by the Brevard County LP chair, Nathan Slusher, and really the only thing that we have to do here is sign paperwork. There's really not much. Frankly, the ability to have something to market is something that outside of just saying, "Hey, join our political party," who we believe these things. No, we can actually. Our best branding mechanism for this party have always been our candidates, bar none, and our presidential candidates on top of that. Gary Johnson received the highest vote total we've ever had, and way blows our voter registration numbers way over that number. And that's really those are the type of voters we want to identify and be able to recruit into the party.
So let me ask you then, let's say we go through this, and by the way, just for the record here, for the purpose of this show, I have no particular opinion. I do, but I'm here to obviously ask tough questions and make it challenging. So I'm not necessarily hostile to the idea, but I'm not necessarily sympathetic to it, at least for the purposes of this show. So let's say that we go through this process, we sign the paperwork, we get on board. How long till we know whether or not, when's the earliest that we find out whether or not this was a good idea and it gave us some sort of value that we thought it might?
30 days after March 19th is when the supervisor election will release the list of everybody who voted. So that's the minimum. Okay.
And then can this be reverted back to the old way just as easily by signing pay?
This is really a one-shot idea, one moment to say, hey, we have this opportunity. It's every 4 years. So the next time we would try this is in another 4 years. So I think it's okay to experiment with something that we may not know all the outcomes of, but you know what? It's better than than sitting on the sidelines and watching the other political parties play political party while we're sitting here and saying we have the greatest message, we have the greatest messengers, we have good candidates, and we don't, and so we should put them to work, honestly.
Okay. And then there was a question that I had from earlier that you had mentioned about the candidates, and you said it would make them have to work a little bit harder. How does that, and that's what I'm not terribly familiar with, how this impacts, say right now we have, I believe, 5 people that have formally filed to run for president. How does this, we sign this, how does it affect their campaigns, either money or effort?
Hector, I'll go first on this one real quick, if you don't mind, because I'm actually in support of this. This is a side of it where I'm like, okay, you know what? So here's the thing. We believe in making our party, starting with Florida, something that matters. Okay? So once we start doing that, once these candidates start realizing if I want to win Florida when it comes to even election time, I got to get down there. I got to spend some time down there. I got to actually be a part of what's going on. You have to influence votes down here. Now, here's the thing. We talk about, spending money and stuff like that. You have a choice. Like, listen, I just ran for office, and I had to make financial decisions inside of that. Do I send out mailers? If not, do I go to all the events? Sometimes I go, you know what, that event isn't worth going to because it's not going to be friendly. I'm not going to gain anything. And so candidates at that point right there can start deciding, hey, is it worth me going down to it? They still decide. It's still up to them. And if they see that there's a benefit for them being down here, let them spend the money. Let them realize that Florida has to become important. We have to start making Florida something. And I think that if we start saying, hey, you come down here, earn our vote. You don't get to just have it from being afar. Put the effort in. I mean, it's no different than the big two do with their primaries. If you notice, there are people already hitting Iowa. They're already going there. And listen, listen, because we understand they want that state. They want to win that state in primary. It means something to them. It's important to them. I think we do the same thing. Now, it's not forcing any candidate to do anything. They can choose on their own whether they want to be involved or not be involved, spend the money or not spend the money. We're not forcing them to do anything. But now, hold on. They would still be on, like they'd still be in the primary, even if they didn't come down here and spend any money, though. Correct, Hector?
Well, that would be up to the state.
What candidates can do is they can decline to have their name added to the ballot, which I think is a surrender. Sorry, I just adjusted my camera. Which I think is a surrender. Can you hear me? Okay, I see a little.
I can hear you, but it looks like older video or something because I don't see your mouth moving.
All right.
I can hear you. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, it might be my computer. But the point is that these candidates, libertarian candidates especially, have to learn how to campaign, knowing they're going to be outspent 1,000 to 1 at the very least in the presidential election. So what do you do with that? I mean, you have to rally supporters. You have to get the press on your side. You have to make points. You have to deliver supporters that are not libertarians to your call, to your flag, and that's exactly what has to be done in Florida as well. And if these candidates want to say that they want to be competitive in a presidential November election, they have to figure out a way to campaign without knowing that they're going to be outspent. So, and there are ways to do it, and I don't want to hear any excuses about it. It's really just about what's your message and how do you focus it to the right places to make people move.
Okay. And then going back on something that Tubb said, so this does sound like in some way it would impact the delegates in 2024 at the Libertarian National Convention because candidates can campaign. And then when they go and they give their speeches at convention, they can say, I polled the highest in Florida. And, in many other states, I guess I assume that there are other states that do a presidential preference primary as well. And so then I will agree that this does sound like very much like a benefit, because one of the big arguments that we have in the party is over messaging and messengers. And the argument tends to be so-and-so is going to be a better messenger. No, so-and-so will be a better messenger. And I think that you bring up a good point, Tubb, that in this particular case, if you have this presidential preference primary open and a candidate, like let's say Bill, Bill comes down and he does, very, very well compared to several other candidates that are trying to get the nomination, then he can later go and say, look, you guys were wondering how my message would resonate. Well, guess what? Here's the data. The data says that in Florida, the message resonated very, very well, right? And and then whatever other state does something similar. So I think that's a very interesting perspective as far as how this could impact more than just, okay, it's a big giant poll. What do we get from it, right? Like, because initially it sounds like a big giant poll, and okay, so what?
It is.
And and some of the things that I'm hearing, I think are good. Like if you want to try something out, but then you decide, hey, this is no good, then you can undo it. Because these are the kind of questions that I think we need to get out in the air. So speaking of questions that we need to get out in the air, let's talk about one that has kind of hit home here in Duval. We're not going to mention any names, but we did have one significant member that brought up something, and I've heard it from other people. And this apparently is such an issue that people, at least one person, maybe more, are willing to quit the party over it. And that is the issue of spending money. And the issue here, the question is, okay, does this align with the party principles, either by politically or philosophically? And so tell me how this does not violate, because you know, libertarians love their principles. Okay. And so tell me how this doesn't violate any principles in terms of spending taxpayer money on effectively a poll.
Well, I'll take the question. So this, and I think still see a little delay in my video.
Yes. Okay.
This isn't a question of party over principle, or I want to make very clear that the people who are, you and I, Tub, everyone watching here, has committed to a process that involves taxpayer funding. In other words, the very existence of the Libertarian Party nationally and in the state we've already committed to a process that is taxpayer funded. Our closed primaries already, when we have them, are taxpayer funded. Our election that we participate in with our candidates are taxpayer funded. The very nature of the laws that we abide by, we agree to a degree of taxpayer funding. So to say no taxpayer funding is both counterproductive and a question that's already been answered. So maybe it's just some people don't understand the nature of how these decisions we've already made that are baked into this process. But I don't see a problem. I don't see a problem with us. You know, in other words, we as a society have decided that if we're going to have taxes, and if we're going to decide have these decision makers voted upon, then it's incumbent that we have this regulated, that we have it's funded properly for the sake of having what they call good government, which is a term hard to explain, but there it is. Other states are doing this already, so it's not a question of, and some of them do privately fund theirs, of course, and others do. At least 8 state parties do accept taxpayer or government-run primaries. So this is a question that's been resolved to a certain extent. The way even our national party has to do FEC filings, campaign finance filings, reporting. We do see this itself. But this is, I would love to have not privately funded, privately managed, entirely primaries myself. But this is, I'm working within the framework we have right now.
Okay.
And, I also address this in a way that says, because well, we don't think we should be spending taxpayer dollars for anything along those lines. It says, so then you don't believe we should be running candidates then? Well, we should be running candidates. I'm like, well, hang on. You understand that we use taxpayer dollars in order for those candidates to be listed on the ballots. And then there's kind of like, oh, but I'm like, it's the same thing. They're already going to be there. There's already a primary. It's already, all you're basically doing is adding another box. So you're saying, hey, this group only. That's all that you're doing at that point. It's no different than running a candidate at that point. And I agree with Hector in the fact that, you know what, we're already paying for it anyway. Like we're already paying into the system. It's already, so my thinking kind of says if we're already paying into this, we might as well start getting some benefit out of it. And I think that we become like what you often refer to as the purists. Well, we can't ever do that. Well, let's be realistic here. And I say let's finally start getting something in return for what we're already paying for. And to that extent, we go, okay, here's the framework for right now. Now, moving down the road, do we find a way to make our primaries more, like maybe we do them online, or we find those ways, and that's fine. But I think that for right now, we take the framework that's in place, because here's what I tell people all the time. As libertarians, I don't think as far as campaigning and stuff, we have to keep following the ways that the two parties tell us. But the idea of the framework, listen, the only thing we can do right now is fight within that framework. Because once we get in that framework and we start making changes, we can break up the framework. But there's no reason for them to break up the framework for us on the outside. The only way that's going to start happening is if we are able to get to the inside and start making some changes.
Okay. So let's take a couple audience questions here because there's some good ones here. Let's see. We've got this one from Patrick Leisner. It says second biggest issue is potentially fraudulent that you're misleading voters to believe that a primary will determine who the delegates vote for. So how do you, and either one of you can take this, but how do you get around that so that the NPA voters that we're asking to participate in this poll, and then they find out that somebody like myself, who is a delegate, maybe goes and votes for, maybe the candidate that actually lost, right? In that particular case, because this is non-binding. And so you could have 5 candidates. One candidate could get like 60% of the votes. Then the least candidate could get 10%. And I as a delegate could go to the national party and vote for that 10%, the person that lost the presidential preference primary. And so now how do we deal with the fact that the NPA person maybe didn't understand that particular process, that it wasn't binding in the first place? Either one of you, go ahead.
So does my idea of keeping it closed help resolve some of that issue then? Because because NPAs would be voting anyway. And then would it make it easier then that our party understands this is non-binding? It's not something we have to go crazy about. Our people should be informed with that. So just keeping the NPAs, because that's what you're mentioning here specifically, like you mentioned a number of times, they're NPAs. So at that point right there, we go, okay, if we keep NPAs out, we don't have to worry about justifying our choices to people outside of the party.
Right.
It doesn't change the fact it wouldn't change the fact you still have to justify it to party members as a result anyway. You're still stuck with the conversation. Let's just take a hint from what's happening right now. It's already non-binding. These presidential preference primaries have been happening for about 80 years now. Because the law that was created was in the 40s. So and no one's ever complained. They all kind of understand the mission. This is a preference primary. So you are here to vote to show your support for the candidate of your choice. And if you want to organize and show up to convention to make sure you're a delegate that can participate in supporting your candidate, all parties have to do this anyway, no matter what.
What it kind of does, it kind of gauges. Like if you're a candidate, you're only at 10% of this. You either drop out or get hot, and it lets your people who are supporting you know that same thing. Hey, you know what? When we go to national convention, I got to plug my guy pretty hard. I got to start bringing some support in because we see where he's standing inside the polls.
Okay, so here's another question here, which is not directly dealing with the PPP, but let's bring it up on the screen here. Are the delegates there at national to represent the people or their own views? Now, I'm going to take a stab at that first, and I'm going to say that according to my understanding of at least in Florida here, the delegates here in Florida, the state delegates, they nominate who they want to go and represent them on the basis that the person is going to make a good decision. So my understanding would be that the delegates are there to effectively make a decision on behalf of their state that they best see. So there's no binding as far as I know, delegates from the state to the national. I think that exists in all of the states, but I can't say that for sure. So my assumption is that, that the way that our system is set up right now, that it's really there to represent the delegate. Each delegate is there to represent effectively their own view, but on behalf of Florida, understood by the delegates who sent them. So we're like, we trust your good judgment. Would you guys agree with that?
I would just add that for those who went to Reno, that is the last national convention, you would have heard the term, the party belongs to those who show up. And the decision for who's going to be the national candidate, the presidential candidate, will also be decided by those who show up, and a majority of them. So these are the rules we all abide by participating in this framework of the Libertarian Party. If you don't like it, get enough people to show up with you and change the rules.
All right. So I'm going to jump back. I'm trying to bounce around and get some different, get different names here, but I do want to address this. I want to kind of go back to that taxpayer thing. Because I thought this was kind of interesting, because this is a common argument that, that you might see in the Libertarian Party here. And that's, again, from Patrick Leisner following up with his last one. He said, it's okay to use a little taxpayer money as long as it's not too much. Am I right? So let's address that, because isn't there a point when we say, hey, we're engaging in the beast way too much? It's one thing to say, hey, there's a certain level that we have to engage in, but isn't there a point where we say, you know what, we've crossed a line that we really shouldn't have, and how is that not this line?
I'll take that answer.
Yeah.
First off, I want to point out that, again, we exist in a taxpayer-funded electoral system, so we already accept this. But the second of all, this is a one-time request. We don't. Once we see the results, we'll say, "Oops, we'll never do that again," or this is a great idea. We should try to do it again or even expand on it, right? Ultimately, though, we are for equal protection of the law as libertarians. We want to see taxpayer dollars work at the very least, in a sense of people's rights aren't violated. And the only way to really do that is to give people more choices. Because right now, if we do nothing, and nothing is basically the alternative here, nothing we would leave it with only two choices or stay home, right? So that is not why I'm here, representing myself or working. I'm now in my third year on the board of the Libertarian Party of Florida. I'm here to change the way people look at the party, and I'm here to change the way that people have offer people opportunities to engage in the party in meaningful ways. And meaningful can be as simple as a preference poll. If we could do it on our own, I would do it in a heartbeat. But we don't have the resources to do it on our own on a statewide basis, even with the greatest technology. So I firmly believe that it's not a question of whether it's a little bit of tax dollars or it's a lot of tax dollars. By the way, this has already been paid for in the budget that was recently passed. So these are costs that are baked in, and asking them to print out a couple of more ballots basically is not going to make or break the Bank of Florida.
Okay. And so when you say it's a one-time thing, does this mean that every 4 years the party would have to petition? So it actually only would apply to the 2024 election season. And then after that, we default back to you are not involved unless you send yet another request in the future.
That is correct.
Okay. All right, gentlemen, I think we're winding down. I don't see any more questions that we haven't already answered. So any final words on the topic? There's no reason to kick a dead horse here. I think we've covered as much as we can. Hopefully this, has given people something to think about. And, maybe some minds were not changed. Maybe they were, what have you, but at least hopefully we did our due diligence in giving out information.
Can I ask something of Hector?
Sure.
Okay. The reason I say this is because Hector is kind of the spearhead of this one. This is one that he's got behind and he's driving forward, which is fine. I'm fine with that. So are we willing to consider two things? One, are we willing to consider keeping it closed? Okay. You don't have to answer this right now. Are we willing to consider keeping it closed? But this one I would like an answer on now. Are you willing to hold off the vote on this as the party to give us some time to get this information through? Because I believe you said we have till August or September or so to really have to know our decision. So are you willing to give us some time to represent this better and help get the word out a little bit?
So the answer to the first one, actually the answer to both questions, yes.
Okay.
I would, even if we kept it closed only to libertarians, it's still better than nothing, right? And two, the deadline to submit the request is in November, but I would very much like to have a little bit more lead time on that to see what the reaction from the Secretary of State is in regards to our reaction. So we have time to perhaps take some to then consider whether or not, for example, if they say no, and we know we have right to it, then we may have to consider suing the state of Florida to get it. Now, right. So, and I'll just say one last thing, just to close off here, is that there's a well-known saying that keeps getting repeated. Most of you probably heard it. It's the quote is, "There are more libertarians outside of the Libertarian Party than in it." And just how many libertarians are those? Does that reflect? Well, nationwide, that exists anywhere from 8 to 14% of the electorate in any given state. And it's suggested then as a result that the ballpark figures about 10% of all registered voters in the state of Florida consider themselves small L libertarians. And who came up with that? There was a lot of research after the Ron Paul 2012 campaign as to who were all these Ron Paul supporters that were self-identified libertarians. And there was significant research to try and do that. And they revisited the question in 2017 after the numbers that Gary Johnson did, right, in 2016. So this is something that people have been paying attention to for quite a long time, but we have not been part of that conversation as a party. And we need to figure out, how can we at least start with the people who already align with us ideologically.
Got it. All right, gentlemen. Well, I'm gonna close this out if you guys have no further words. I will say this comment just popped up that I think is actually correct. Let me throw it up on the screen here. Get ready for a fight from the duopoly if we change our process. They don't like
Okay.
that. I'm pretty
It's-
sure that we can bank on that.
Yeah, it's
So
the process they impose on us. So you better believe they want to enforce it.
right.
Mhm.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I'm gonna close this show out. Hang backstage for a moment, and I appreciate you guys coming on and taking. Hopefully they were kind of tough questions there for you, and hopefully the audience, appreciates the difficulty that I tried to deliver. So with that, gentlemen, I'll see you in just a moment. All right, everyone. I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. However, that is all at this time. Please find other episodes at libertydad.com and archived video episodes at youtube.libertydad.com. You can also connect with me at Liberty Dad on Facebook, Liberty Dad Pod on Twitter, where I usually am, or email me, go old fashioned, to libertydadpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. Have a great week. Catch you next time.